Before we start this week's episode of Infection Control Matters, could I just remind you that Brett's created a website for us. You can now subscribe and receive an email when a new episode comes out. You can also search collections of our podcasts on particular topics. So if you're interested in something like healthcare-associated pneumonia or surgical site infection, for example, you can find all of our podcasts on that particular topic with details of the people we've spoken to. Just go to www.infectioncontrolmatters.com and enter your email, and you'll be notified when a new episode appears.
Well, hi everybody, it's Brett here, and I've got Martin for our latest edition of Infection Control Matters. G'day, Martin.
G'day, Brett. I thought you'd forgotten who you were for a moment then, I have to say.
Yeah, and I think I almost forgot. It's late in the day. I've had a long day.
Yeah.
And still going.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to more exciting things. This week, we thought we'd chat about ice machines. Now, I sort of thought for a while ice machines weren't used, and a lot of facilities have been taken out, but I've seen them in facilities in recent times. I think they can play an important part of care for different client and patient groups. But managing them has always been a problem. I always found them a nightmare to manage. I remember taking several ice machines out when I was in infection control leading a hospital in the UK. What about you, Martin? Did you come across many ice machines when you were working?
Sadly so. Like you, they were the sort of thing that would give me a cold sweat, not because of the ice.
Yeah, it was, the opposite.
The issue was always, who the hell owns this?
Yeah.
You know, whose job is it to clean it out?
And a nice little incubator potentially too.
Yeah. Because
Even
it's
though
always
they're cold.
warm, nice and warm around it. Yeah, well, they're allegedly cold.
Allegedly cold, yes. So there was a paper in Journal of Hospital Infection. Margot Casals was the author on that with a number of others. And the paper was called How Clean is Your Ice Machine? There were some other parts of the title, but I really was caught by the title. I do like catchy titles like How Clean is Your Ice Machine? Anyway, they really were interested in this idea of ice machines and are they clean? And how clean are they? And in the introduction, actually, what I've found, and we've harped on about this a fair bit on our podcasts in the past about following manufacturer's instructions. They make interesting points that there's not really decent guidance out there at a sort of jurisdictional, perhaps government and other types of levels about what to do with ice machines. But the default is follow your manufacturer's instructions. And we know how well that goes with many things. But what they did was they did follow manufacturer's instructions for their hospital and made sure that the manufacturer's instructions were followed, which includes, checking the external parts and doing a machine disinfection every 6 months. And they wanted to know then if doing this regularly, could you still find bugs? I thought it was quite a sort of an interesting take on perhaps what could be a common problem.
Think about manufacturer's instructions. Are they validated manufacturer's instructions, or are they just something the manufacturer thinks that it will work?
Thinks it's a good
idea.
That's
the issue I've had. If it's not designed to be a healthcare device, and many that are purchased for healthcare are not specifically designed for a healthcare setting, nobody thinks I've got to do a validated procedure here to make sure that this is safe to use. And I want to use the word safe to use because, as you're going to discuss in the paper, I wouldn't necessarily say that these are safe to use, especially as they're generally used with the most vulnerable patients in the place.
Well,
the
that's
longest standing patients.
I think about where we were using them and where I've seen them used now in places I've get involved with, and they're often not the type. They're patients who we probably fall into many high risk or risk categories at least. Anyway, so
yes,
and there's a lot of complicated things with ice machines because you could go and look at the machine itself, the ice, but as we know with things like sinks, there's a lot of things that happen upstream that could impact on what happens as well with the quality of the water, with plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of different things. And the authors go into great detail in this paper about how they considered all those upstream related potential confounders. And, they put filters and things. There were filters on pre the ice machine as well to try and to look at that. They also looked at biofilms as part of their sampling and swarming processes through the methods as well. And the methods in the paper really well described and quite detailed. So if you ever have an interest in how am I going to go about this sort of practical element of finding pathogens or potentially finding pathogens in an ice machine, and then the methods in this paper might be a good starting point. But what do you reckon they found, Martin, in the water samples and the ice?
Well, I've read the paper, so obviously I know. So it's almost a trick question. I mean, yes, non-tuberculous mycobacteria, but a lot of yeasts as well. And sort of disappointingly for me, they didn't identify the yeast down to species. It was just Candida spur.
I know, and given the
global issues with but that's right, 40% Candida. I mean, and given the in critical care around the world, Candida auris is a bit of an issue. It would be fascinating to know if that was implicated in this, because nobody really knows exactly where the reservoirs are. That we feel it's likely to be environment related, but also biofilm as well. But you just don't know from this paper, so it could just be non-pathogenic.
Yeah, that's right. It could have been, and I found that too. When I saw the Candida species, I went, "Oh, well, what type?" Because I was really fascinated to see whether they found some of the things that you just mentioned. It was done in a big hospital too, 770-odd bed hospital, and I think got 36 different ice machines. So Sydney is a lot of ice. But, you're right, Candida species, Enterococcus, I think was also found, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa was also found. You're right about the Candida species was quite high at 40%, but I think, finding Pseudomonas is somewhat problematic when we know that Pseudomonas is such a problem in wounds and other things within healthcare environments. And we're seeing, multi-resistant strains of Pseudomonas really cause problems that, I think that's a really important finding from this study in terms of the pathogens that they found. The other sort of side of things, I guess, is the biofilms side of it and identifying pathogens from biofilms. And I always find that interesting because how disturbed are the biofilms going to be anyway in general use? And it's this perennial sort of question, I guess, Martin, about biofilms and their role. But nonetheless, there were biofilms, and those biofilms were found to have pathogens in them. The other thing with the Enterococcus, finding Enterococcus in the ice machines, it was also interesting because I kind of wonder how the Enterococcus get into an ice machine.
I suspect when dirty hands go in to pick things out.
Yeah.
or a non-particularly clean container goes in. I don't know what this ice machine looks like, but generally you have some sort of scoop that goes in to pick out the ice, or does it actually dispense into a container? I don't know. It may dispense into a container, but somehow it's got in there, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And how's the Pseudomonas got through the filters and contaminating the water inlet? So the filters maybe aren't being changed, or... don't know.
Well, they were following manufacturer's instructions, though. So
yes.
Maybe the manufacturer's instructions weren't up to scratch on this one. So, yeah, you're right. And that's where you sort of think about the practical nature. If you're choosing an ice machine, if you had to have an ice machine in your facility, I'd be certainly thinking about things that don't involve people putting their hands in the ice machine wherever possible. Sometimes I've seen things like, the scoops being soaked in a Milton solution next to the ice machine and things like that. But I think if we're finding Enterococcus, it's not ideal. It's probably contamination coming back from those who are using it rather than you'd hope something upstream. But you don't provide some of the other organisms could well be upstream. So I guess the other sort of thing I found with this then would be, okay, so if you were going to put these machines in your facility, what would you do to try and make them as safe as possible?
But I think, you go through a proper procurement procedure, don't you? Because I found that ice machines would turn up being bought by charitable group, generous people donating something they feel would be nice to the hospital. I'd like to have ice. We'll donate one of those, and it doesn't often, didn't used to go through proper procurement channels, so it just appears and it's plumbed in before you know about it. So I think if you're going to have something like that, then it has to go through a proper procurement process where the infection prevention team get a chance to scrutinise the cleaning instructions and actually have a look at the design of the machine.
Yes.
How easy is it to clean? What's the plumbing like? What are the filtration systems like? How onerous is the maintenance program going to be? Get it all completely agreed exactly who's going to do it, but see if the manufacturers have got some validated cleaning instructions where they've actually had it in use in a similar type of environment and they know that their procedure works. Because clearly in this case it didn't.
No, that's right. And the other two things I was thinking of was, if I was getting that scenario now, I'd be certainly asking for validated manufacturer's instructions. And, of course, all those things you mentioned about the implications and who's doing what and get all that agreed to. The other thing I'd be keen to know is about the design of the machine and how is that machine designed to prevent contamination and also multiplication of pathogens, particularly gram-negatives and perhaps even some of the fungi. And what is that company... What can they provide you by way of evidence that they've thought about these things and have got perhaps some kind of engineering process that will help mitigate that risk in some way, shape or form? And unless we ask for these things, I suspect they're never going to change.
Problem is, it'll be a department like critical care department who would like to have one of these because they can see it's beneficial to patient experience, etc. So when we come along with a list of reasons why they shouldn't have it, it doesn't make us that popular. And that is the problem, is trying to find some way of making it safe enough.
Yeah.
So also trying to educate staff on a critical care unit. Okay, if you're going to have one of these are absolutely the things you're going to have to be looking out for, and design into your surveillance algorithm something that would be quite sensitive enough to pick up something, because...
what are you going to do when you find these pathogens? This is the trick. It's a bit like the endoscopes, isn't it? When you start finding stuff in endoscopes. What are you going to do? So if you've got something and you've identified the Pseudomonas in there and some, I don't know, let's just say it's Candida species, but you'd probably hopefully better identify what type. But just to say Pseudomonas, are you going to shut it down? Are you going to?
I'm going to punch the air. I'm going to say get it in the skip. No, I would say, is there any way we can actually properly decontaminate this machine in a validated manner, which may mean stripping the whole thing out.
And the interesting
I don't know how replacing some of the parts are, the pipework, etc. Yeah,
that's
right.
Practical. And going back to the thing I mentioned at the start, where in manufacturer's instructions say, in this instance, for these machines at least, a complete ice machine disinfection every 6 months. And that's what they were doing. I wonder how effective that is, actually removing it. If you've got a pathogen in there, might be good for
if you've got biofilm in there, how do you get rid of that?
That's right. Yeah.
You have to, that's physical attempt to get rid of it. If you've got an established biofilm. And some of the parts, you may only be able to get a chemical through. We know just putting chemicals through scopes is very bad news. You've got to use a manual method. So is there a manual method that you'll be able to use to actually to incorporate in the 6-monthly decontamination process? And then how do you validate it afterwards? Is there some way of testing it to show that what you've done has made it safe again for a period of time? And is 6 months, because that's a blanket number, 6 months, it doesn't take into account individual circumstances. You may... No. If you're working in a really warm, temperate climate, a lot of humidity around, you may have to up that to every 3 months.
That's right. And look, every machine will be different with those requirements too, with their own different instructions. I guess the other thing was we need to ask these questions of manufacturers and those selling these products, because unless we do that, there won't be the drive and momentum to try and redesign these things to reduce risk and or provide us with better information. And I think we're seeing that in other elements of IPC, where we're asking for more information about specific things. And when more people ask for that, it's the onus is on some of the companies to provide that evidence or provide information on how they've considered that. So perhaps that's another takeaway.
And it's down to individual organisations and what your incoming water supply is like, because in this particular case, some of the chemicals used were actually causing phosphates to precipitate out in the machines, possibly enhancing growth and actually blocking some of the filters as well. So, and that would depend on the quality of what's your local water intake like as well, because people have, you can have hard water, soft waters, high minerals, lower in minerals.
We're using natural
I don't know enough
rainwater.
about it. I'm not an expert in
not
this area.
Yeah, look, it's fascinating. Anyway, I just thought I'd run that by. It's coming into our summer here in Australia, so the washing machines might get cranked up a bit more, but maybe not so much for you, Martin.
Well, it's been 30 plus degrees in the UK for the last few days, and this supposedly heading into autumn. So I think it's a changing world, isn't it? And this is maybe something else we've got to think about as we go forward as well.
Absolutely.
As temperatures increase, can we put pressure on a couple of good manufacturers to produce something that could be demonstrably safe in a healthcare setting? Maybe with some removable components, you could run through a proper automated decontamination process.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be a good way to go about it. Send it to your local sterile services department and have them decontaminate some of the innards. I don't know.
Well, always good chatting about these things, Martin. And until next time on Infection Control Matters, it's bye from me.
And bye from me.